The boat approached the shore, we noticed a sight that I personally had never seen before. Above the great mass of cloud there appeared a small circular one containing all the colours of the rainbow. By the way, I haven't digitally enhanced these pictures in any way. It was suggested that it was just a freak of nature, but to many of us, it was as if God was adding his blessing to the end of a great day. Robert has recently moved to a beautiful new house, and you should see the famous people that the famous Robert Harland has on his wall.
And this is a picture of Bill Clinton, which he very kindly signed for me. It was 1998. He came to Hong Kong and he spoke at the American Chamber of Commerce. So we all gathered there to meet the guy. Very funny guy, nice guy, very friendly. And I think if he ran for president today, he would probably win, despite all the scandals. The photograph was a very famous photograph taken by Monty Fresco of the Daily Mail, who was the doyen of sports photographers for many, many years. And the picture was taken during the 1976 Olympic Games in Montreal. And Monty, who was a bit of a character, he told me once that photography was 20% technical ability, 20% equipment, and the rest was just pure luck and dare I say it, bullshit. So he said he could see the picture. There was Princess Anne with all these members of the equestrian team with their hats. He knew what the picture was. So he had to get to a high point, but there was a security barrier and he couldn't get past it. So he went up, he was a Cockney, and he went up and the security man stopped him and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm Monty Fresco from the Daily Mail." He said, "I've got to get upstairs for my heart pills, which are being kept for me by a colleague, Ian Waldridge." I said, "Oh, you better go." So as I walked past, he said, I called out, "Your Royal Highness, Princess Anne." And she turned around, bang, that's when I clicked it. So she was the only one to turn around. And the picture became a famous picture.
Yes.
Famous picture.
It's absolutely gorgeous. Congratulations on having a copy.
Yes. And poor old Monty's now gone to that great studio in the sky.
Okay.
But he was a real character. Mark Spitz, the famous Olympic swimmer, 7 gold medals in Munich and 2 Olympic gold medals in the previous games. He was a member of what was called Team Arena, which was part of Adidas. And from 1977-78, I was head of international public relations for Adidas, and I was responsible for Team Arena, which was a group of famous swimmers, including the British swimmer David Wilkie, and they would tour countries giving coaching sessions and signing autographs and generally promoting arena through swimming. So I got to know Mark Spitz quite well, and we were in Berlin 1978 for the World Swimming Championships, and we were both at British Forces Broadcasting, and the presenter at the time was a man called Nick Bailey, who is now a key presenter with Classic FM in London. And I brought Mark into the studio, British Forces Broadcasting in Berlin, for an interview, and we had a picture taken, and I asked Mark to sign it afterwards.
Adidas awarded a golden boot to the top European football player every year, and when Robert left Adidas, he was awarded one as a souvenir.
Jim'll Fix It was a very famous British BBC television programme. Children would write in asking if Jim could fix it for them, like a child might want to fly in an aeroplane, a child might want to ride a steamroller or drive a steamroller, and Jim would fix it. And they would show the film, and the children would come into the studio, and he would present them with a badge saying, "Jim fixed it for me." And Jim'll Fix It was a program run by a man called Jimmy Savile, who died a couple of years ago, aged 84, a very famous British disc jockey. Now, twice I fixed it for Jim. The BBC had a letter from a girl who wanted to run against Marilyn Nerfville, a famous British athlete. In fact, she was British, but she then she was Jamaican originally, so she ran for Jamaica. So it just so happened that Coca-Cola, the company I was working for at the time, was sponsoring a major track and field event. So it was very easy for the BBC team to come, and Marilyn Nerfville was running in the event, for her to come to Crystal Palace. The BBC team came and they filmed the child running against Marilyn. The second one I did was with David Wilkie, the British swimmer, the first British swimmer to win an Olympic gold medal, 1976, in 64 years. And David was very happy to come to Crystal Palace, the sports centre near London, where Coca-Cola was sponsoring a major swimming event. And some little boy had written in saying he wanted to swim against David Wilkie. The boy was about 9 years old. And we did it. And the producer, Roger Ordish, who became a friend of mine, to people like me who did all the running around in the background, he awarded them each a special medal. I fixed it for Jim. Peter Max is an American psychedelic pop artist. He was in fact the one who started the whole psychedelic pop art movement in the 60s, and many of his designs and his pictures, they appeared all over the world. He came to London in 1970 when I was the public relations manager for the London Arts Group in Bond Street. And he and I got to know each other pretty well. I launched him in Britain. Publicity was terrific. We had him on Top of the Pops. We had him on TV programs, interviewed by endless newspapers. And I was actually, he invited me to come to the US to work for him in New York. And I was quite keen to do that until I was told that there was a possibility that I, as a visa-holding working person in the US, I might be drafted into the US Army and fight in Vietnam. I didn't fancy that at all, so I backed out of the deal. But I kept in touch with him, and he very kindly, about 3 or 4 years ago, when I found that old photograph of us together in the gallery in 1970, not only did he sign it, but he also painted over it. And I don't know if it's worth anything, but it's an original Peter Max.
Not only Peter Max in the gallery, but a few Philippine presidents, starting with Cory Aquino, Fidel Ramos, who followed her, then lastly Joseph Estrada. Wow! Next on the shelf is a young and handsome Robert Harland, and as we look back to his ancestor, we see that there is a definite family resemblance, especially in the lower regions. Let's have a closer look. Yes, especially the eyebrows. A couple of years ago, Robert entered the Adobo Festival, which is held at the Balay Negrense Museum every year. There is an adobo cooking contest, muscovado sugar cooking contest, food booths, adobo lunch and kitchen art exhibit. Although the name adobo is taken from the Spanish, the cooking method is indigenous to the Philippines. When the Spanish conquered the Philippines in the late 16th and early 17th century, they encountered an indigenous cooking process which involved stewing with vinegar, which they referred to as adobo, the Spanish word for seasoning or marinade. Typically, while the Philippine adobo can be considered adobo in the Spanish sense, a marinated dish, the Philippine usage is much more specific to a cooking process rather than a specific recipe, and is not restricted to meat. Typically, pork or chicken or a combination of both can be used. What's Robert cooking for dessert?
On an English syllabub, cream, white wine, sherry, and with muscovado sugar, and on top it has a calamansi jam with muscovado sugar again.
And would you believe it, British foreigner Robert won the adobo contest with his Courage shrimp adobo. Recently there was a very interesting article in the Negros Daily Bulletin. A locally made marmalade has won a silver medal in the international category at the 2012 World Marmalade Championships held recently in England. The calamansi marmalade with brandy was made by British chef, Negros Daily Bulletin writer and Bacolod resident Robert Harland. This is the first time the Philippines has been represented at the championships, now in its 7th year. Harland's citrusy concoction scored 19 points out of a maximum of 20. He was pipped at the post for the gold medal by an entry from Singapore. Calamansi is not known in Europe, and the judges noted the marmalade's unusual taste, but they liked the flavour. Harland said he intends to enter the competition next year, but perhaps with a slightly modified recipe using whiskey rather than brandy. Ye gods! The organisers received over 1,700 entries from all corners of the world, a 30% increase over 2011, clearly showing that marmalade is as popular as ever. The championships were part of a week-long marmalade festival held at the historic Dalemain Estate in England's Lake District. Over 70,000 British pounds, which is 4.7 million Philippine pesos, was raised for various charities. Congratulations, Robert, and here's how he did it. Dr. Ver Laxon congratulates Robert.
Out of 1,700 contestants, wow, that's really a feat. I could not duplicate that role. Congratulations.
Thank you. Hazel, here is an actual jar of the marmalade. That bottle of brandy is cheap.
It's the regular one. Okay.
You need some light, you can just turn this on, Robert.
No. Use the regular one. Okay. No, it's off. I'll just turn it off.
Thank you.
If you need anything.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, we do. Just give me. Are you ready?
No. Use the regular one. Okay.
Now, making calamansi marmalade is actually very simple. All you need, 1 kilo of calamansi, which you can get, of course, anywhere, very reasonably priced. You need 1.4 kilos of sugar. You can use white sugar, muscovado, or brown sugar. And then you need the secret ingredient, a spot of brandy. Now, we don't always use brandy as posh as this. The local brandy is certainly good enough. Now, the first thing we have to do, there are some rather tedious parts of the process. We've got to, of course, take the tops off the calamansi with a knife, or if you've got strong fingernails, you can take them off with your...
Robert has help with this.
Okay. Now, after you've washed the calamansi, of course, give them a good scrubbing, because they've had pesticides and what have you on them. You then put them into 1.7 litres of water. Very simple. Take it to the stove. Well, I've always liked marmalade, and I could not get the nice chunky marmalades that I was used to when I lived in Hong Kong and when I lived in the United Kingdom. So I was on a trip to the UK visiting my family, and I bought some marmalade which I put in my hand carry, and it was made by, I think, Frank Cooper of Oxford. And when I went through security at Heathrow Airport, it was promptly confiscated. I asked why. They said because it's a dangerous weapon. I think they mean any gels could contain explosives or something. So my potentially exploding marmalade was confiscated, and I just said to the guys who took it, I hope you enjoy it, and came home empty-handed. I contacted the various British companies that make the chunky marmalade I like. None available in the Philippines, so I thought, well, what the hell, improvise and make your own. That's how I started. I put the calamansi into the water, and it's been boiling for about 2 hours. 2 hours, and maybe a little long, 2 hours 15 minutes. The important thing is to make sure the peel is very soft, because the calamansi peel can be very hard if it's not cooked enough. But this has been going now for 2 hours. Time to take it out and move on to the next step of making calamansi marmalade. As you'll see, it's very soft. You retain the liquid, by the way, that's an important part of the marmalade. Smelling very citrusy already. Very good. And next comes the rather tedious part of making calamansi marmalade, and that is taking out the many pips and also slicing the peel. Zenaida here is an expert at doing this, and so I'm going to ask her, as she has more nimble fingers than I do, to start the process. As you can see, it is rather time consuming.
Every fruit
is stuffed with pips, but it's worth it for the taste. And here we are, no pips and the peel nicely cut up by Zenaida. And now we transfer that back into the liquid. So when you put the peel that's being de-pipped into the liquid, together they should weigh about 2 kilos. So in goes the sugar, and give it a jolly good stir to make sure that it's all dissolved. And you boil rapidly for 15 minutes. But you get a fair amount of scum,
right?
So you need a skimmer, and you need to constantly work around the edges so that any scum is removed. You then have to let it settle until it cools down.
For how long?
Well, I usually leave it overnight, then it sets. And then if you find it's not quite the right consistency, it needs a little more boiling, you can just boil a little longer. A lot of it's with trial and error in many respects, until you finally get it right. But I think I've got it just about right now in terms of the setting period. So you can always tell in the morning too, when you come down into the kitchen and put your wooden spoon in, you'll know if it's too thick or too thin. Okay, so the marmalade has now been boiled for 15 minutes, and we've let it cool down. Here is the finished product. It just needs one last ingredient. But before we put the brandy in, we just give it a bit of a mix.